When someone has no hope in their life, they have no care for their future. Why should I set goals or plan for my future, they may say. Imagine a mind void of hope and care. What sense of purpose can this person have except one of possible harm or destruction to themselves or others? A sense of purpose breathes life into your thoughts, gives direction to your actions and meaning to your life. Imagine having no real reason to get out of bed or to go to work or even live. Your purpose in life is like an inner compass that guides you on your life journey. Finding your life purpose and your deepest life intentions can help you move through life with greater focus and clarity each day. With clear purpose in your life, you spring out of bed. Without purpose, your life and actions will seem meaningless. I worked with a couple whose children had left home after 21 years. They were lost. They felt empty. What will we do now, they asked. Their main purpose in life was looking after their 2 children, and now they had gone, there was a big space to fill. I guided them to a place where they discovered something new to be passionate about, which gave them a new sense of purpose. Their life had meaning again. It is only when you seek, discover, and understand what your life purpose is that you will set purpose-driven goals that will truly fulfill you. Ask yourself what you are good at, what you love doing, and what you feel you should be doing in your life. The answers to these series of questions are clues to your purpose in life. Living a purpose-driven life gives you focus and clarity. You may even find, like I have, your purpose is to make a difference to other people's lives as well as your own.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Make Health Your Habit podcast live. I know we're here on a Wednesday. That's because of technical issues that we had on Monday. The duppy them, as my friend would say, tried to get in the way. But we're back here with hopefully a show that can bring some comfort to so many people, especially with the year that we have had. Because this show is all about grieving in coronavirus times. Yes, welcome everybody. Hopefully, as the individuals that were here on Monday are still with us today. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, I have extended this to my Facebook platform today. Just say hi, just quickly. I will see the messages coming up. If you're on YouTube or anywhere, then all you have to do is you can have your conversations on YouTube, and that will be absolutely fine. All right, so we're really here today to help and comfort you as much as we can. So good evening, baby. Nice to see you today. You're a regular on the show, and we have this Gen 1 BMW. Good evening, Jen. If there's anybody else who wants to say hello, please say hello in this moment before we get started with the show. I do like to recognize people have made the effort to watch the show. So if you're there, as I said, watching it, I think we're on LinkedIn as well. So LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And if it's right, we should be on Twitter. Good evening, Michelle. All the best of the festive season to you as well. So, this show was a difficult show for me to even plan. I know we're talking about dealing with grief in coronavirus times, but, I lost my mum. It will be coming up to 4 years in January, and I'm still feeling it. And so this show is bound to bring up some thoughts in mind, but also some comforts for me, and I hope for you. Good evening, Mr. Tony Harrison. Glad to know you're back with us again. And, we're talking about grieving in today's show, but remember, it's all about celebrating it's all about celebrating the lives of people. That's what death is about. We like to celebrate people's lives. So I have a great guest on me. I mean, I'm really been impressed with her resume, really been impressed with the way she has engaged with me in the show. She's really gone out of her way to kind of structure the show with me so that we can really give you the maximum benefit and the maximum support in the time. So, as I said, keep the conversations going on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. Conversate between yourselves. If you do have some questions, you can put them in, but really, if they come at the end, we can really try and deal with them in a more effective manner. But ladies and gentlemen, it's about time that I introduce you to our guest for today. And our guest is Jacqui John. Good evening, Jacqui.
Good evening, Ken.
Right, well, we're here today, unlike Monday. Thank you very much, Jacqui, for taking the time to join us again today. I know you have a busy schedule. You took time on Monday, and you're back here today. And I really think that people are going to appreciate your input today. So, Jacqui, first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself, please, Jacqui.
Okay. Well, I'm a mother of 4. 2 of those children are my actual birth children, and I am a grandmother to many, and I am a great grandmother to 2. In my former life, I was a borough youth coordinator for Newham. I was also a project coordinator for the youth offending services. I have a strong passion towards working with young people. So youth is where, my heart is. I'm also a bespoke workshop facilitator, and I was also a foster carer. So I've done a lot of work around children, young people, and families overall. I'm also a minister of the gospel, a Christian minister, and now I'm working within the field of a psychotherapist, which I'm thoroughly enjoying.
That's a very varied career there, but there was a thread running through them, and that thread is caring. You're obviously someone who cares for people and wants to help and support people. That was absolutely clear. So tell me, in your role as a psychotherapist, and especially when it comes to bereavement, what brought you down that road, Jacqui?
Well, it began around 34 years ago, where the church that I was a part of, some of the members experienced various kinds of losses, down to, from, say, a parent dying, or on one occasion a parent was murdered, and on another occasion another young lady lost her 8-month-old baby died suddenly, and I was just compelled to move forward. Normally when someone suffers loss, the majority are uncomfortable on how to approach the grieving person, and so they create a distance. But I felt compelled to move forward and be close, and I did that for many, many years. But then I carried this sense of, am I being truly effective? Is there an area where I can, perfect the way that I am and provide a better service to grieving families? So even though, people say thank you and they remember you for life, but I just felt like I was falling short of understanding what it was like for these individuals. And then when I suffered loss myself, I learnt a lot, but still I had this curiosity and this hunger to understand more deeply what you know what what's commonly experienced by those who suffer loss. So that was my drive. So it's taken me a while to get there, but like you said, there was a journey that I went on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that journey that you've been on. Now, here's a question. Now, I've studied cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT.
Yes.
But I was clear. There was a clear demarcation between CBT and grief therapy. In fact, grief therapy seems to be a therapy in itself, Is there a particular reason for that? Why grief therapy is a kind of a specialized form of therapy?
Yeah, because I think something like CBT challenges your thinking in order to create a different outcome in your behavior. With grief therapy, it's about allowing the individual to tell their story, um, to talk about the relationship that they had with the deceased person. Because often, what we tend to do is say to grieving individuals, don't talk about it, forget about it, you've got to move on, stop crying. And so the grieving individual feels, they go through an experience of, I'm remembering my loved one, but I can't talk about it because it's going to make other people feel uncomfortable. And so that has a real negative effect on them mentally and emotionally and physically. And so it's a cycle that's unhelpful. And so with grieving therapy, it is all about the narrative. It's about encouraging the grieving individual to speak freely or not. Sometimes, I've had a grieving individual, they just come for a safe place to cry. That's all they want to do in that hour is cry. And that gives them a sense of relief, and then they go off. They don't come every week and cry, but I had one client who cried every week for 4 weeks. And then around the fifth week, she began to, ask those questions like, why me? Why did this happen to me? And then it goes on, and then they share their narrative, and I guide them through that. So it's about allowing the bereaved person to know, I'm interested. I want to get to know your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your baby. I want to get to know and understand your story and what it was like for you. And that in itself is therapy because it's getting things out.
You've raised a question I was going to ask you later. So I'll talk about my personal experience. I was incredibly close to my mum.
Right.
Really, really close. I think it's got to be one of the most devastating experiences that happened to me. I mean, I was, friends have known me for years, never saw me cry, never saw me emotional. But I decided that I was going to allow that emotion just to be free. But you raised the point there. Even now, I mean, my mum's on my phone. I see my mum every single day, a picture. And sometimes I feel I may want to talk about my mum to individuals. And you raised the point there, whereby people who have lost people, there comes a point where they feel kind of guilty talking about that person because they feel they're burdening the other person. What would you say to those individuals who have lost someone, who feel they want to talk, but somehow feel that the people around them might think, oh, not your mum again, oh, not your sister again, and they feel guilty talking about their lost loved ones? What would you say to those individuals?
Well, first of all, sorry for your loss. And one of the things that you raised was, how the closeness of the relationship you had, it's about keeping that alive. And I think it's important that that individual does find someone to express, to have that conversation with, and maybe just to check in with a person. And I know that's not always easy, but if you really feel that there is no one around, then I would say use a journal. Use a journal where you could just express that. You could write your thoughts, and have that conversation through writing, where it's just a very personal thing between you and the memory, and the thoughts and feelings that you have. But it's important to express it and not to keep it in. Or to engage in therapy, find a counsellor, because that's what we're paid to do, is to listen and listen effectively. And we know the importance of just listening, how therapeutic that is. So that's my recommendation. Hopefully everyone has got a friend who is a good listener, and if they do, um, I'm sure that person wouldn't mind. Just even if you scheduled it, let's go out for a coffee and let's talk. Because one of the things that we all need to realize is that, upon birth, it's evident that one day we're going to die. So death is something that happens, within all of our life experiences. And so it's not something that we should avoid or find uncomfortable to talk about. But for some reason we do. But it is a normal part of living.
Yeah.
Dying is a normal part of living.
So I think that leads me nicely onto the first. I have a series of questions here that I'd like to ask you, and the first question is, and I'll just show the audience what the first question is. So the first question is, it's normalizing grief. That's the first question, and you just very nicely went on to talk about that. How do we normalize grief? How do we accept it as a normal part when you're a minister, and even I know some people in the faith, when they've lost someone, oh, God's been wicked, is there a God? They didn't deserve. How do we accept it as a normal process of life?
I think it is, first of all, acknowledging that, being in touch with ourselves as well. It's like, yes, I'm here, I'm alive, but one thing is guaranteed is I'm going to die one day. And for us not to be afraid of dying, and just accepting that we are here for a period of time, and some of us will be here longer than others. Sometimes a baby doesn't make it into the world. There's people that have, experienced the child die in the womb, and that's so devastating. But it's something. It's a reality. It's something that happens. Um, and so normalizing it is important for the person who has suffered the loss. So when we are evasive, and when we are uncomfortable in naming what's happened, we project onto the other person, the person who suffered the loss, that this isn't normal. So when we use, expressions, when we avoid the word death and dying, that makes it feel like this is not normal, because we use other words to cover it, such as, the passing of, or the departure of. We might use other expressions. I'm sure there's loads out there. I just can't remember them all at the moment. But it's important to, in my practice, when a client comes to see me, I will say to them, okay, I understand your mother died. I won't say, I understand your mother passed away, or that you lost your mother. But I would describe it as a death, because, we don't lose them. They died. And to say that you've lost something, it means you have to go and find it. It's gone. But when somebody dies, they're still very much present. For some of us, we remember their smell, their voice. They're very, very present. And so the idea of loss almost says, I can't find them. They're not around, but they're very present with us. So it is about trying to normalize it in a very sensitive way with the person who has suffered that bereavement.
So a question had just come up. Is it normalizing? Is that the same as coming to terms with?
No, it's slightly different. Coming to terms with is a part of the grieving cycle, and it's part of the healthy part of the cycle, in accepting that that person is no longer here in the capacity that they were before. So we don't gain access to them in the way we used to by giving them a phone call or a visit, or experiencing, their mannerism around us, but that we are now adjusting to the memory of, and we're learning how to move forward in life with that person in a different capacity. So normalizing death is just accepting that death happens to us all. It's imminent. And, if we don't normalize it, then what happens is people become fearful. They become fearful about their own mortality. They become fearful. My sister died. Does that mean that my brother and my other sister are going to die? And so then they become very anxious around, you know, they become just very focused on death rather than life. They become very fearful that someone's going to become sick, and if anyone goes into hospital, that means they're going to die, and that in itself can have such a bad impact on the mental health of individuals. So it's just learning how to be very present in the here and now and recognizing, yes, death does come to us all. And because death comes to us all, let's enjoy the life that we have. Let's enjoy life with who we do have with us. And I think if we're more conscious of the fact that death comes to us all, we would form better relationships with one another and have less regret.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for clarifying that. So here's a question. Taking into consideration, we're talking about normalizing death. We're talking about coming to terms with death. Death, I always say death doesn't knock. It doesn't send a telegram. It just arrives, but it always leaves a residue.
Yes.
And culturally, that death is celebrated or mourned in different ways. Specifically, 2020 is the context of this question, because the coronavirus has unfortunately brought about more deaths, or brought death closer to people, but it's restricted the way that many people can celebrate or mourn someone's death, and in some cases made it illegal. I've heard cases of in the first lockdown where individuals were only allowed a certain amount of people in the graveyard, and the graveyard locked the gate, and individuals jumped over the gate. They jumped over the gate, and imagine you're mourning your mum, you're mourning your dad, or whoever is close to you, and you have family generally mourning, and you have 20 people in, and you can have a police officer or 30 people come to you and say what you're doing is illegal. I mean, this is a compounded the emotions that people are going through this year. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you say to the many individuals who unfortunately have had to go through that process this year?
Yeah. It is unprecedented times, and especially around, losing someone. I myself have experienced that and feel a little bit stuck, having suffered the loss of my aunt and my uncle, who are very, very close to. They died 2 hours apart as a result of the coronavirus. And I wasn't able to go to the funeral. And I watched, a poorly connected Zoom, where the holder of the phone focuses on what they want to focus on, and that if you was present, you maybe would have drawn closer to the grave or held someone's hand. And so not being able to do that, I myself, I just haven't been able to deal with that right now. It's almost like I press the pause button until that time comes. Yet, however, as a psychotherapist and dealing with individuals who have suffered loss during coronavirus times, people of different faiths, the Muslim faith, the Black and Caribbean culture, it's really, really very difficult. Even before death, someone is terminally ill, that their time is coming to an end. And normally, we're at the hospital bed. Everyone goes to the hospital. Someone is there to make sure that that individual is looked after, that they're being fed, they're being cared for, and they're not able to have that time. And then just receiving that call of, okay, they have passed away, but you can't come. And being given all of these restrictions, it does heighten the pain and the fear and the anxiety around losing a loved one. It's horrendous, but yet we need to find ways of managing that, of attending to our grief when impossible situations like that happen. So my work with my clients, I've encouraged them to, either create a journal, a scrapbook, um, have an item of clothing, of jewelry of that person, and create. It's progressive bonds. So instead of looking at what you didn't have and you couldn't have, it's about focusing on what you did have and what you do have, and allowing the the grieving process to take place. So it's finding a way, because the more we focus on what we don't have, and the more we focus on what we what we didn't experience, the more the anger builds up, the more the frustration builds up, the more the fear builds up, with nowhere to go. So it is important to find other ways. And I think a good therapist will be sensitive to your unique individual situation, because we can't bracket people up together. And that's why this is a little bit difficult to answer, because even now, my mind is going to so many different cultures, so many different stories that I've heard in the counselling room. And so it's difficult to actually say, okay, do this or do that. You have to sit with that individual person and hear their narrative, hear their story, in order to be able to respond effectively. But it's not easy. It isn't easy at all. And without the right intervention and the right support, it can have devastating
Yeah,
effects.
I think that's the best you can answer the question. I think Rosebush just said not having to attend a family member's funeral has been so hard to deal with. We have a tradition in the way we send our ancestors off, and not being able to do this is such a bad
Right.
situation. So as well as the grief people are feeling anger
Yes.
and frustration. And I suppose it's I think having respect for the dead is one thing, but when you're mourning, sometimes that goes out the window, and it's possibly finding a way to channel that energy into
Yes.
something else. And as Mr. P just said, the problem with bereavements this year in particular is that you're people not having the closure. And the other, we're gonna talk about the grieving cycle in a moment. But another point that's come up is with the restrictions, with the amount of people. Not only do you have the tensions of doing something illegal or having too many people, but that causes friction, because why didn't you include me in the 20? Or why didn't
That's
you
right.
include me in the 30? And
That's
people
right.
who have been friends for a long while feel left out. Um,
Yes.
I, what I'd like you to speak to is not so much the individuals who are having the funeral, but I'd
Mm.
like you to speak to the individuals right now who unfortunately have been left out because of the restrictions, and speak to
Right.
them to say, well, look, you know what, you're in a sense you're making this situation even harder. So to
Mm.
the individuals who, because for example, we've had a very dear friend pass away recently. As you
Yes.
know, he was very, very popular. and
Right.
his funeral would be huge, but we know it's not. It can't be. So there are going to be people who are going to be frustrated that they can't attend. So what would you say to those people who, during this corona time, who can't attend? What would you say to those people?
I would say to them, first of all, acknowledge it. It's important to acknowledge it. This is what I need to do, and I'm not able to do it. I believe that will then open them up to other ideas that will enable creative ideas to enable them to, you know, share their tribute, celebrate the life of that loved one. And so the ideas that come to my mind, and I know it's become even more difficult with this new tier 4, because it doesn't allow us to meet up. But prior to the tier 4 restrictions, I would say, maybe groups of 6 come together and create your own ceremony, your own tribute, share your stories with one another, because I think this is what's quite core to the grieving process, and the therapy is sharing the stories. So with Paul Lawrence, we had a 9 night where people came together on Zoom, and people shared. And one of the things that struck me was hearing others say, "I'm so glad I came because I feel lighter now." They felt that you know, they were heard, and then they also benefited from what they also heard from others. So where we can't come together physically, let's utilize Zoom, let's utilize Skype. And we don't need to wait for one person to make it happen. We can make it happen in our groups, because some of us, I'll stick to Paul as an example. He's a massive figure that has touched hundreds and hundreds of lives in different parts of the world. And so I would say to those individuals, come together in your groups and have your tributes, share your story, exchange how you feel, have a time where you do cry together and you do celebrate together. Don't allow what you can't change to cause you to stay stuck in a place of anger and in a place of pain, and in a place of negativity, because that will only hurt and harm yourself and those who need you, because you won't be in a good place, a good
Yeah,
state of mind.
yeah,
So that's what I would say.
yeah. And I would respectfully add that for the individuals who at this sad time can't attend a funeral, whether it's Paul or anyone, not to be frustrated with the individual who's putting on a
Yeah,
funeral, because they're having
that's
to make
right.
hard decisions.
That's
They
right.
unfortunately have. So don't be frustrated. But
No,
if you are left off this list, it doesn't mean you're any less important. It
not at
just
all.
means they have had their own reasoning. And if you are the person making a list, again, you have your reasoning, and don't feel bad about it, because these restrictions weren't put on by you, and you just have to make these choices, because making that list is
It's
an
not
added
easy.
difficulty now. So I just wanted to speak about that point there.
Mm.
Um, Jen said journaling poses a risk. Now I won't talk about it. I'll just add my point on that. I know journaling does pose a risk, but Jen, in every therapy, journaling is part of it. Journaling is a great. It's actually quite cathartic. Journaling is. So in most therapies, journaling is used as a way, as a healing process. And yes, there's always a risk when you put something down, but then there's a risk if you talk to somebody. I recommend journaling. It's very cathartic. The next
Can
question.
I also add,
Go ahead.
Ken?
Go ahead.
Um, when we say journaling, there's another term called expressive writing.
Mhm.
And it's where you don't think about what it is you're going to write, you just write. And you get a notepad. and you just write, and afterwards you can tear out the pages, tear it up in bits and get rid of it, burn it, get rid of it, because the whole point is
Yes.
getting it out. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why journaling is effective. But then there is expressive writing where you don't need to dot the I's or cross the T's. It's just about getting it out. You may
Okay.
find yourself writing neatly, and the next minute, you're scrawling across the page because you're so angry,
Mm.
and that's okay. It's just about getting it out.
Okay, great. Well, I think that leads us nicely on to the next question I'm going to ask you, and that question is: we talked about normalizing grief, or becoming, accepting grief. The next is the grieving cycle. So I'm very interested in the grieving cycle, because the issue for me is I've been grieving now for nearly 4 years. How long does how long does it last? Is it, should it only been 6 months? Could it be 5 years, 10 years? So just allow us to understand what the grieving cycle is, please, Jacqui, and how long it may last.
Okay. There is no time frame with the grieving cycle, and there's no order to the grieving cycle. It's the cycle exists just to help us to know where we're at. And again, it normalizes the grieving process, when you're able to say, okay, yeah, I'm feeling guilty, but I've been feeling guilty for the last 6 months. So that would tell us that you're stuck at guilt, and it's something that we need to work on in addressing that and not to ignore it. So the grieving cycle is, and again, it's not in this order. It can happen at any time. But part of the cycle is denial, where it's like, no, the person hasn't died, and you're still expecting them to call, or you're still expecting to see them. Um, and part of that is the shock of the death of that person. I remember when my dad died and when my sister died, and I'm walking down the street. They died 6 months apart, and I've seen my dad. It's like, that's daddy. But then when I've looked again, obviously it isn't. It's somebody else. But it's like my mind was refusing to let him go and to let my sister go. Um, there's a numbness, in denial, and then there's the anger, the pain of the loss, and you may find yourself angry at the person who died. Why did you leave me? Why did you go? An anger towards God. Um, uh, you may project your anger at different people, and I encourage people to communicate their anger, to state it, because it's important to acknowledge it. If you say, people are afraid to say, I'm angry that the person who died left me. They're afraid to say that because they feel as though you know, they're projecting something negative onto the person who died. And I've explained you can be angry at somebody and still love them. So it's important to express that anger. And without expressing it, you can remain stuck at that place. There's a bargaining process, where you look at, okay, maybe if I had done that, maybe if he had done that, maybe if they had done that, then this wouldn't happen. And so there's all that kind of reasoning that happens. And then there's depression, and the depression that we describe is not one associated with mental health. There is a depression that is associated with the grieving, process, and it's normal and it's healthy. It's part of the process where, intense sadness, loss of appetite, um, can't sleep, that happens, headaches, pains in the chest, that's all symptomatic of the grieving process. And then there's acceptance, which is a nice part of the cycle where it's accepted. My sister has passed away. She's not going to be, at the wedding. She's not going to be at my daughter's fifth birthday. I'm going to miss her, but I'm going to remember her. And I can imagine what she would say if she was here. So it's accepting, but it's also including. It's not trying to erase the memory or the involvement of that person, but it's just accepting that they are still part of your life, but in a different way. So you would tell your daughter stories about your loved one. This is what they would say. This is what they would do. So they're still very much a part of your life, but in a different way. So that's the cycle
So
of grief.
that's the grieving cycle. So
Yeah.
so my mind is thinking like this. I think there was about 4 or 5 cycles that would someone. I said that the acceptance was that final part. Would someone go through all of those cycles to reach acceptance?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Would they jump from one back to the other,
They can.
so they can? Okay,
Yeah, they can do the whole cycle all over again.
okay,
So just when they think that they've accepted, something triggers, and now they're feeling guilty. Something else triggers, and they're now
and they
feeling
go
angry.
back. Okay.
Yeah, so it can happen like that.
So how would one identify? Because the thing I kind of love about cycles is that possibly you can see an end, because when you're grieving, you sometimes think no end. There's no end, and there is such collateral damage that can happen when you're grieving. There are people in your life, and we can talk about that later. But is there a way? Is there somewhere people go where they could help them identify what part of this cycle they're in?
Well, first of all, there's resources available to all, and there's books on grieving that's accessible for us all on YouTube, TED Talks around the matter of grieving. It's there. So if you really wanted help in understanding where you are, or you may even find it therapeutic to hear somebody else's story, and you may identify something in your process that is similar to their process. And also, bereavement counselling is accessible. And I know some people think, oh, I can't afford it. There are services that receive funding in order to provide individuals with, say, 6 or 12 weeks of bereavement counselling. And then there are other services that will, consider your income, and whether it's £1 a session or £5 a session, whatever you can afford, you can pay that. So there are a lot of services available, very sensitive to the needs of those who've suffered the death of a loved one.
Okay. I mean, thank you very much for that. And I think it's important for individuals who are going through that grieving process, that anger, that frustration, to realize that those feelings are normal, and
Yes.
there is nothing wrong. And I think that the biggest thing that I would say from my experience, and hopefully you'd advocate the same, is to let it out, and
Yes.
invariably find that safe space. That safe space where you can be you. I remember I've been in situations, been having dinner in a restaurant, and I just started to cry. It just came out of nowhere. And this is what happens with grief. You 1 minute you feel you're absolutely fine, and then something just happens, and then all of a sudden it just compounds and puts on. But I made the decision right from the beginning to not hold it in, to let it out. And I do think that's helped me, even though I'm still grieving. And now even putting this show together was kind of emotional for me. But obviously I'm doing my best to moderate in such a way. But thoughts of my mum are in my mind right now. And it is about, as you said, normalizing those feelings of grief. So thank you very much for that grieving cycle. And as you said, there's some great TED Talks, you said, that people can go and watch.
Definitely.
Okay, that's a great steer for some people.
Definitely.
Just so for everybody watching, this show normally takes about an hour. But when we have such a subject like this, I do extend it. So just let you know, we may go in a bit longer than an hour. because it's such an important subject and there's such breadth and depth to it. So just to let you know. All right. So here's the next question I want to put to you. And that question is, managing grief during special events. Now, it's such a pertinent question because Christmas is coming up. And not just this year, but last year, people who died last year, the year before, they're going to be, even though we do have the restrictions, they're going to be places around the Christmas dinner table that are going to be empty. Right. And if there is a time when we remember people, it's around here. And there are going to be many people who are going to be having their first Christmas this year without their loved ones. What would you say to those people today?
It's like my deepest sympathy, first of all, because I understand how difficult it will be, and uniquely difficult, because so uniquely you have your experiences, you have your memories, you have all of that to deal with, and it's really difficult for me, even as a therapist, and someone who's experienced it myself. It's difficult for me to just, present or offer ideas and ways of dealing and managing the experience of the loss, like what it will cause, because every individual is so different. Some will have a negative experience, and that's something else, that we've got to consider. Not everyone had a harmonic, beautiful relationship with their mother or their father, and so for some it will bring up traumatic memories and intense anger and very low moods, and for others, a deep sadness and a deep longing for that person to have been there. And then, the questions coming up: why did you have to leave? Why did you have to go? Why couldn't it have been miserable auntie over there, or ungrateful cousin over there? Why did it have to be you? And all of these things can come up. And so again, the emphasis is it's normal, it's understandable. And the worst thing to do is to try and suppress it or ignore it. So that's why you tend to find people will turn to, drugs or alcohol or some other distraction to try and run away from it. But it's better to sit with it and to talk about it and to express it, even if you're somebody who is alone and on your own. Again, I direct them to expressive writing. But say if it's somebody who is not comfortable with writing, then maybe getting a recording device and splurging it all out. Splurge out the anger, splurge out the pain, splurge out your longing and your desire for that person to be there. But it's important to hear yourself, to pay attention to how you're feeling, that you do it for yourself. Don't depend on others, but give that to yourself. Give it to yourself, acknowledging what you're experiencing during those times. And don't, some of you may want to put a picture up and, speak to the person and say, I wish you were here, or I'm glad you're here, or do you like what I've done? Do you like what I've created? Whatever way helps you is the right way for you.
I think that's such a great advice there. I remember my first Christmas with my mum, because Christmas was all about my mum, and with me having to make Christmas, because I used to make Christmas dinner and sit there and watch her eat it and then give me her verdict on my food. It was always the same, and it was just it just seemed so empty doing it. And there are so many people going to experience that. The way I did it, it was just about, as much as I was grieving, it was a celebration. I made that final year a celebration. This is what Mum would have done. This is what Mum would have wanted. These are the foods Mum would have liked. And we sat round, and then we got everybody to say something that a memory. We just all turned round. We said a great memory of her, and it turned into a celebration as much as if it was a grieving process. But it's going to be a difficult time for so many people this year.
It is.
And not just this year, but for the who've lost people years ago. But I think the real message is to face up to it, because I know that some people may have found this episode challenging to listen to, because for them the loss is raw. And so I suppose it's a fine balance between facing up to it, your grief, and running away from it. And I don't know where the line is. I don't know where the line is. I don't know if you have a thought on that balance between facing up to the grief and being able to deal with it, or constantly running away from it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I know that the pain, the physical pain, can be so intense. And who wants to sit with pain? It's, we're going to try and run away from it. We're going to try to avoid it. No one wants to sit with pain, but it's there. And, I'm mindful that not all of us has somebody to come alongside us and sit with us and allow us in our pain to express ourselves and to share our hurt and to sob without trying to intervene and say, stop crying, it's going to be all right, don't worry, time is a healer, and all of those other unhelpful things that we can sometimes say as a way of trying to escape feeling that other person's pain, or being reminded of our own pain that we went through. And so I think one of the things that is also helpful is not to judge another person's way of dealing with their grief, because that's really unhelpful. If you see someone that doesn't cry, or who doesn't talk about that loved one, don't judge them. They're trying to deal and manage their grief, and maybe they are, crying in the toilet, or maybe they have, they're working by a different framework. I remember one of my clients came to me. He was a man, and he said, I just want to know if I'm normal. He said, I accept that we all have to die. We have an expiry date, and my dad expired. Not when we wanted him to. He fell off a ladder, he hit his head, and he died, but he expired. So is there something wrong with me? Because I'm not like my mum, who keeps wailing and crying about how she misses him. I want to know if I'm normal. And so I had to help him normalize how he processes his grief, because there's not a right way or a wrong way of dealing with it. So someone could label him cold and callous, but he wasn't cold and callous. And as time went on, he spoke about the moments with his dad that he missed. But he still had that mindset with regards to expiry date. That's how he dealt with it. That's how he managed it. So it's important that we don't judge others for how they are dealing with their grief, but maybe try to be a safe place for them to do that. And you don't need the answers. They're not wanting you to give an answer. They're not wanting you to say it's going to be all right, you'll get over it. And sometimes they just don't want you to say anything. Just be silent, but just be present.
I think that's some great advice there. It brings me back to when my dad passed away. Having two parents being passed away, I actually feel like an orphan. In my old age, I feel like an orphan. But my dad passed away when I was about 25, quite young. I didn't have, and I'll share some personal information. I didn't have a relationship with my dad. I was quite detached. There were many years in passing. I won't go into the circumstances before I saw him, and when I was told that my dad was dying, I went to see him. And this man on this bed, he was dying of prostate cancer. I didn't recognize him. I was only knew because it was my dad. That's how long I didn't see him. So I wasn't emotional about his death, his passing. And I lead up to a funeral. I remember my friend saying to her, "Don't you feel sad?" And I felt kind of numb. But what happened is on the day of the funeral, when I was actually, we have the tradition in the Caribbean of burying, putting the dirt on. As soon as I picked up the shovel, that was it. The tears just came, and they just came in it, and they didn't stop, and they didn't stop. So, grief has got a way of affecting people in a different ways at different times. And as you said, it's important not to judge anyone in the way they grieve, even if in your mind, they are not showing the emotions that you would show. It doesn't mean they're not grieving. Right. And that was just an example, because I don't mind being personal and sharing an example of my situation. I have another question for you, and this is the next question. It's about unhelpful things to say to yourself or others who are grieving, because as you know already, when you're grieving, you can beat yourself up. I mean, there are often people in funerals who are crying, and I say sometimes it's tears of regret rather than tears of sadness, because they regret X, Y, Z. And then there are other people who say unhelpful things to them. So the question is about unhelpful things that you say to yourself, which I think is an important one, but also allowing people to not also say unhelpful things to other people. So, you extrapolate on that point, please, Jacqui.
Yeah, I think we have to accept that, first of all, every relationship is very unique. And so it's important not to make judgments to someone that is grieving. Some things can come across, so can cause more damage than help. So I think, insisting that a mother who has lost, whose baby has died or whose child has died, insisting that that mother don't cry and be strong is unhelpful. It is extremely, and it's something that I've become aware is quite common. That even, the husband may say it to the wife because the husband is now embarrassed by the woman's tears. It's unhelpful. Saying to yourself, I need to be strong. I need to get over this. I need to move on. Is also very unhelpful, because you don't move on, you move forward. You don't move away. You don't get over. It's not about getting over it. And so all those terminologies is very unhelpful. In the church, I remember when my dad died first, and then 5 months later, my sister died. And, being a Christian, I wanted my dad to believe in Christ, and he didn't, he refused. But my sister gave her life to Christ. And yet I found that I was mourning and in pain more for my sister than I was my dad. But I then learned that the reason why I mourned so deeply over my sister was because we were so close, like she was my best friend. But I remember thinking, why am I crying so painfully over her and not painfully over my father? But then that was something I came to realize. But I remember someone in church, saying to me, well, at least your sister's gone to heaven, not like your dad who's gone to hell. And that caused so much pain, so much torment in my mind, imagining my dad in flames, burning. And you wouldn't wish that on, if you have any enemies. It's not a helpful or healthy thing to say to someone. And it took me ages to process that. And thankfully, because I know the scriptures and I know the heart of God, I was able to change that narrative. But as a new Christian, it was torturous. So I think it's my advice to people is you don't have to say anything. And if you can't say, don't struggle to find something comforting to say. Maybe all you need to do is hold the person or just listen to them. But don't try to find things to say, because you may say something unhelpful and that sticks with that person, and it can have the effect where it shuts them down from expressing or talking. So don't try to silence anyone, don't try to stop them from crying, don't try to tell them they need to be strong, or if it's someone that's lost a husband, don't worry, you're young, you will find another husband. No one wants to hear that. They had a relationship with that individual that is now not present. That's their grieving, that's their loss. You wasn't in that person's shoes, you wasn't in, behind the walls with them. So don't come with that assumption that that's helpful, because it really is not helpful. And there is just so many things. So stop before stop and listen to what it is you think is good for you to say. Just stop, think before you speak. But don't.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
some great advice there. The other point is when people have these tears of regret, they can really beat themselves up, especially
Yeah.
if someone dies unexpectedly. Well, why didn't I tell them I love them? Why didn't I do this with them? And that torment can really destroy someone. So to those individuals who may be watching this, who have had individuals pass away this year, last year, or whenever, who have been constantly beating themselves up because they feel that when that person was alive, there was something or some things they should have done that they didn't get a chance to do, and they feel kind of, disappointed in themselves about that. What would you say to those individuals watching this program now?
Again, that's normal. That is so normal to have regret. It's part of the cycle. Um, I would encourage you to say it now. Do it now. Express it now. It's not too late. Um, and I think if you were to spend some time with that individual, you would discover that there were certain acts, certain things that were said that are evidence that you did communicate previously, those things, that they understood that. And so sometimes it's just having that conversation and exploring it, helping the person to remember what actually was, rather than to regret that moment, that missed opportunity, but to remember previous times where you experience an exchange that you're happy that you experienced, you're happy that you got to do that. So yes, you may have missed out on the opportunity. um Sometimes, well, that morning I was tired, I was irritable, I didn't kiss them goodbye. Well, let's remember the times that you did kiss them goodbye. Do you think that that person understood that you were tired and you were irritable? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they did. So it's not telling a person how to think during that time, but helping them to think out of the box of that small window of time, and making that small window of time almost like tell the whole story for them. So it's helping them to see things in its correct perspective. But yeah, that is normal. Things like, oh, I wish I didn't, um, you know, I wish that I'd taken them to the doctors earlier. I knew something wasn't quite right. So it's almost like taking on responsibility for the person's death. And there's just other examples that it does happen. It's normal, and it's part of the bargaining, as well as the regret. But I would say do it now. I remember my dad was very, very difficult to communicate with. He was such a disciplinarian. He spoke and I would jump. And so I had to visit the grave and use that moment when he couldn't scare me or interrupt me and just express. And in my expression, I told him I loved him. And I don't think that was something I ever did while he was alive. I did love him and I valued and appreciated, uh, you know, things about him, but I never expressed it to him because I was afraid, because he wasn't someone that was warm and nurturing. So I used the opportunity after he died. I went to the graveside and I told him how much I loved him, and I cried, and that was good for me. It was, yeah, because it wasn't about him anymore, because he's no longer physically present. It was about my need to tell my dad, I love you and I appreciated all that you did for me. I appreciate the sacrifice. And yes, Dad, I was terrified of you and that wasn't helpful. But I guess that was the way that you were. So do whatever you need to do. But it's unhelpful to remain stuck in that. Do what it is that you need to do in dealing with that.
I really appreciate you sharing that story. I could see it was quite poignant for you sharing that story yourself. And yeah, I could really sense that the challenge, and I think that's some real help and advice. A lot of people agreeing with you here. I think it's Adele Hyde, I think that's her name. She's on LinkedIn. She said she just lost her husband on the 13th of December, age 43.
Wow.
June's just messaged both her parents died in 2009 and 2016. She can still remember the last conversation. There's definitely something called Leah Morris said you're doing a great job. So obviously you know who that is. And someone said they have a photo of their son and they say good morning every time they come downstairs. All right.
Yes.
So at this point, I just want to share with the individual, just respectfully. I know it's a very poignant conversation. We're going to come back to it, and I think you've done such an excellent job, not just sharing advice, but just sharing your own experiences, which allows me to relate to the circumstances even more. So I'm just going to ask if you could just excuse me just for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to put you to one side where I should just share with the audience, just stay right there, what I'm going to be doing with them, and some things that are happening with me. So I really want to thank Jacqui for her openness. We're going to come back to her in a moment. I want to encourage you at this point is if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll see if we can get them answered in this final part of the show. So just put them in the chat, whatever platform you have. If you have a question that you'd like answered at the show or a point, please feel free to put them in the chat now. I can see them as they come up, and I'll put them to Jacqui. But for the moment, I'd just like to share with you what's happening with the Lean Mind Body Coach. As you know already, I'm an author, and this is the book, The Lean Mind Body Method. I'm a health coach. I focus on two things, which is losing weight and managing diabetes. So this is a book you can get on my website anytime. And as I've said in the past before, I'm really pleased that I've passed my diabetes reversal training, which means I can offer certified type 2 diabetes reversal training. If anybody's interested or would like to find out a little bit more about how I can help them reverse their type 2 diabetes naturally in 30 to 60 days, then please send me an email The number will be up there. So this is the course here, Diabetes Defeated. Just send me an email at ken@leanlifestyletribe.com. Or if you wanted to contact me about anything, just send me an email there. If you feel you have a story or you want to be on the show, use this email here. But this is the Diabetes Defeated program, which will happen next year. And as you know already, my flagship is Tribe. Tribe is what's turned me from this little dumpling guy at 53 to looking like this at 56 years old. And, you know, it's not just helped me, it's helped women as well. It's a fantastic platform. It's a membership platform which you can join it. And it's all about helping you to lose weight and also improve your health. All right. So if you're age 40, you need to lose weight, gain more energy, Tribe can help you. Again, we have a 7-day trial at Tribe. Just visit the website, leanlifestyletribe.com, and you can learn all about what Tribe is about. It's a whole platform with so much going on. Delicious recipes, food guides, education videos, and there's a whole guided program that people are going through. We have a great community as well in Tribe. So again, just reminding you, it's a 7-day free trial. Visit leanlifestyletribe.com, and it may be something that can help you. Okay? Now, if you like the idea, because my whole focus is about low carb meals and reduced sugar, you can get a free 5-day meal plan from the website. It has this delicious recipes like this garlic trout, garlic jerk chicken with my own jerk sauce and curry salmon. You can get this free. All you do is go to leanlifestyletribe.com, register on the mailing list, and you'll get this in your inbox. So it's a great way to be able to try the way I eat and what I advocate for 5 days. This was supposed to be the next Lean Bites coming up on the 30th of December. It's going to be about diabetes. So again, I'm going to be talking about diabetes, the causes and the symptoms. That'll be next week, Wednesday, here. And next week, Monday, normally this Make Help You podcast live is on a Monday. So next week, Monday, I'm pleased to say I've got Fitz Gaines. This guy's a legend. This guy's an absolute legend in the field of fitness. And he's going to be with me on Monday talking about fitness and exercise. And some of you are going to be surprised about his perspective on it. So this is the Make Healthy Habit podcast live next week, Monday, not Wednesday at 7 o'clock. You know, if you register on YouTube now, you will be able to... you'll be able to learn all about what we do, and you'll be notified. So if you're watching us on YouTube, just subscribe, like if you like this show, or if you're watching on in my Facebook page, just like it, and you'll be notified. All right. So that is just the quick updates which I want to give you. So let me come back to Jacqui now. Okay. So Jacqui, here is another question. Is the question of people losing somebody and feeling that they shouldn't be happy, especially if that person they've lost is their son. What would you say to those people who have lost someone dear to them, and every time they get a moment of happiness, they think, oh no, I shouldn't be happy. I've lost my son, or I've lost my husband. I should be grieving longer. They feel guilty about being happy. What would you say to those individuals?
Okay, so it's highlighting that cycle of guilt, almost, sentencing yourself to suffer. It's obviously, unhealthy, and it would take time to just reframe that thinking and have a conversation around that with the individual person, because it's about discovering where that idea comes from. What point of reference, what happened that fed that understanding to them. Sometimes it could be that someone's projected that directly onto them, as in, or they've overheard someone else make a comment about somebody else, not really grieving over their lost person because they seem to, look very well, looking after themselves and being able to laugh. There is it. I think, like I said near the beginning, it's about being present. It's about the here and now, and it's about normalizing and accepting that death comes to us all. And what would you want for your loved ones um, when your time comes, when you're no longer here? Would you want your children or whoever is left behind to be in a state of misery and pain and never smile again because you're not here? So maybe it's about, asking yourself that question with regards, well, what would you want if it was you? Um, as part of the, exploring, because I think the answer to your true happiness is within you. It's not about what others think and what others say, um, you know, or the religious constraints or the cultural restrictions. It's not about that. It's about you. And I think once you have that resolve within you, it really doesn't matter what is happening outside of you. And, if you lock yourself into that state of misery, it's like you deny yourself from enjoying life. And even that state of being can be quite harmful, again, to your mental health, to your physical health, and to your emotional health, and to your important relationships around you. You may have, say, other children that are now experiencing, not only did I lose my sibling, but I've lost my parent as well. And that does happen. And so even though you're alive, you're now become a loss. You're an additional reason for grieving to somebody else in your relationship circle. So it's important to, sit with that and explore it, not to dismiss it, but to talk about it. Let's talk it through. Find someone that you can talk it through. And if there isn't anyone, then get counselling, because that's important to explore to help you make sense of where that's coming from.
So certainly, don't feel guilty about enjoying your
No.
life. Don't feel guilty about your moments of happiness, as you said, because I think it was that trigger that helped me because I was putting on a lot of weight as I was grieving, and I got to a point where I thought my mum wouldn't want me to do this. My mum wouldn't want my life to go this way, and I used that as a catalyst, which is in essence the reason why we're here today, because that was the catalyst of this chapter of my life. But I do hear all too often, some people just feel guilty. They've lost someone, and sometimes not just months, but years, and they feel guilty, especially if it's a husband, a wife, or a son, or a daughter. They just feel guilty that they are enjoying their life, and that can be a real, restriction on them, and then also their other relationships are impacted. So I think it's an important issue. What I'm going to do now, I've got another question for you. If anyone has any questions, please put them in there. I'm just going to put up here, if anyone's been affected by in any way or would like some support, along the bottom here, you're going to see some services. There are a couple of services, heart-to-heart counselling. You'll see their website, and there's another service called Cruise Bereavement. That's going to be running along the bottom of the show, or along the bottom for the rest of this show. If you feel you need some support, these are two great services. I will put some extra services in the link once the show is finished, but for the moment, these two services would be excellent services to be able to help you if you felt impacted by this show. Jacqui, now I am the husband, partner, wife, friend of someone who's passed away. How can I support them what helpful things can I do, or what anyone could do to support someone in their grieving process?
Allow them. This is my idea. When somebody loses a spouse or a partner, there is such an intimate coming together of those two people that they become one. They, they, even in a bad relationship, there is such a strong bond of intimacy. And whether through divorce, separation, or death, that coming apart, there's a real tear. In death, it is even more prominent because it's like losing a limb, it's losing a part of you. So it's not just the physical person that's now no longer present, but it's as though a part of you no longer exists. It's like you've been used to walking around with two legs and all of a sudden you've got one. That's how challenging it can be for a spouse or a partner in dealing with the grieving process. And there's things like reflecting on intimacy. Who's going to touch me like that again? Who's going to ask me in that particular way, how are you today? Who's going to give me that look that speaks volumes? It's so intricate with regards to what an individual experiences when a spouse is no longer here. And again, we cannot begin to imagine because we've not been in that person's shoes. So it is all about just being present and allowing them, or even not being present. So they might just want to be alone, and being alone is not unhealthy. They need that time to sit with the absence, and then they need time when they need to be with others. So it's like you have to be sensitive. Don't allow them to be alone for too long, but do respect their need to be alone. Be available if they just want to call you and begin to just speak of something that's come up. Like I said, I had one lady, she was married for 45 years. She was 60 and she considered that she was too young to be a widow. I'm too young. He should be here. Why did he leave me? How am I going to cope? How am I going to live? And she spoke about, the experience of going out to events and the awkwardness of seeing her friends with their partners and she was on her own. There is so many emotions that come up. It's so traumatic for someone whose partner dies. We could not begin to imagine. So again, don't try to hurry them along. Don't try to, believe that you know what it is they're going through, even if you also experienced, a death of a spouse. Your story is yours, it's not theirs. Their story is unique, it's individual. And so again, that can be quite unhelpful. You suffered the death of your spouse 10 years ago, and you're now with someone who's lost their spouse a year, and all you're doing is telling your story. You're not allowing that person to deal with their grief and to tell their story. So yeah, there's so much that could be said, to be honest. There's just so much that could be said, but it's not easy.
Yeah,
it's not easy.
I can believe that. I just have to touch on the other side of the question, because I remember my mum, when she was alive, she'd always say, she'd look up in the air and said, "God, take me before you take Ken." She said, "God, take me." And there was often sometimes a little tear in her eye, because she just didn't want to imagine the pain of losing her son. So you spoke about the loss of a spouse. To the parents who have lost children, not just this year, there is a different kind of pain. To those parents that have lost children and suffering that pain, just a word to those individuals, please, Jacqui.
Yeah. Again, accepting that it's very unique and very individual, and it's not what you would ever imagine, but it's something that does happen. And again, it's not about getting over it or removing yourself from it, but it's, whether it was your only child that died, um, knowing that you're still a mother, you're still a father, um, and doing whatever it is that you need to do. Like, I know that there is, a mother whose son died, and she keeps his picture up and she talks to him. She will share her life as she would if he was alive, and she will remember, okay, you were 5 then, and now you'd be 14, celebrating the birthday um, of the memory of that child. It's do whatever is helpful for you. So for someone else, another mother, they might not be able to cope with that, and they may feel, okay, I've got this book of memories, I've got this box of memories, and I am going to put it to one side and go to it when I need to, but I'm not going to make the memory of that child and, the loss an everyday thing, because I can't cope, I can't manage that. So it is an individual thing, and you have my deepest sympathy. I cannot imagine what that would be like. I can begin to, but then I would stop, because to actually live through that is very, very challenging. I've suffered miscarriages, and I remember even with that, it's like the loss of the dream, because as soon as you know you're pregnant, you begin to see a future. You name the child, and you begin to anticipate that child's arrival, and it doesn't matter when you miscarry, um, whether you never ever felt the movement in your womb, the reality of knowing that your potential son or daughter was there and is no longer there, you're still impacted. I remember when I miscarried, and when the nurse, just matter of fact, said, okay, baby's not there, you can go home. And I was so angry. It's like I arrived at the hospital, so frail and so weak. But when I walked out, I felt like I could have picked up a bus and thrown it across the road. I felt so angry. And I went home and I wept and wept and wept and wept and wept, because I felt so alone in my loss. And I felt as though I didn't have a right to grieve, because I didn't know whether it was a girl or a boy. But my loss was the death was the death. The not having that baby anymore hurt.
Yeah.
But we're all different. We're just all different on how we manage
Yeah.
things.
I really appreciate, and that was just so. It was just so open of you, and I could feel it at my end. And we've just dealt with such a sensitive subject, and I hope people have felt we've dealt with it in a sensitive way. I would, the one thing I like to say to people is, people are very supportive leading up to a funeral, but often once the funeral is gone, they disappear. And invariably, that is the time when people need support. So just don't support people just to be visible up to the funeral. It's after the funeral, check in on them, keep them. And the other thing is, I would say, is to celebrate people while they're alive. Celebrate people while they're alive. I'm gonna come back to you, and we're gonna ask how people can contact you. But we've dealt with such a sensitive subject. It's the most sensitive subject that I've dealt with on the show, and I really hope we've paid it the kind of deference it is. But people have lost individuals this year and over the course of many years, and I just think it would be appropriate just to have a little moment of silence during this. So this is what I'm gonna do now.
Yes.
So I'm just have a moment silent in memory. We're gonna light a candle in loving memory for individuals who have been lost this year and in years gone by. May these individuals rest in peace. And as I light this candle, we will have a moment of silence. Okay, so we just had a moment of silent reflection for everybody who's been lost, and just to pay respect. Jacqui, I phenomenal. I really appreciate your contribution to this show, your openness, your professionalism. I think it's really added the kind of substance, and we paid deference to the subject that I wanted to pay, and I hope the audience listening have gained something from this in such a way that grief is a normal process. That there comes a time where it may never end, but it will get easier.
Yes.
Don't feel guilty. Don't feel guilty about your grief. Be prepared and accept that you can be happy without kind of disrespecting the name of the lost one. And for individuals who are supporting individuals, the partners and the friends of individuals who are losing, there are things you can do to make things worse, but there are more important things you can do to help people and support them through. So I think that's kind of a summary. So, Jacqui, if people wanted to reach out to you and possibly avail your services and talk to you a little bit more, how can they contact you, Jacqui?
Okay, well, there's two ways that you can do so. One of the ways is through a service called SAB Counselling Services. SAB stands for Sisters and Brothers. So that's www.sabcounselingservices.com. And then there's my website, hearttoheartcounselling.com, which I believe is Ken has already put out there. Or you can email me at Jacqui, that's JACQUI, .John, JOHN, .counselling@gmail.com.
Thank you very much for that. What I will do is I will put those extra details in the description on Facebook and on LinkedIn, because we have people watching this on LinkedIn and on YouTube, so they will be able to contact you. Jacqui, listen, I words can express my gratitude for you bringing your professionalism and also your own personal experiences to the conversation today. I really do appreciate your time today and taking that. Thank you so much for being with us, and you're doing an excellent job in a much needed service, especially this at this time. And I'm sure people who are availing your services and just in your company at this time have really benefited from your wisdom. So thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ken, for inviting me. It's been a real blessing to be a guest on your show, and thank you to all those who responded and shared your story also.
Thank you very much. So I know we're going to have a conversation in a minute. So, ladies and gentlemen, that we're coming to the end of the show. It was a show I entered into with much trepidation for my own personal reasons, and I definitely wanted to pay the show the kind of deference that I felt was needed. I really appreciate everybody on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, every one of you who have contributed to this show, because your comments have contributed, and some of you have been incredibly open. I really do appreciate your participation. You was as much as part of the show as myself and Jacqui. I really do thank you very, very much for your time. And yes, we have gone on longer than the hour, but on these kind of shows, I do think it was worth giving it that extra time so we could give you as much as possible. You know, we do approach Christmas and you do move into the Christmas, I'd like to wish every one of you a phenomenal Christmas. The best you can do with regard to the restrictions we have. But I do hope that Christmas is as best a festive time as it can be. I will be back with you before the end of the year. But right now, I would just like to thank everybody who supported me up to this journey so far. So, as I like to say at the end of this show, is the best habit you could ever do is to make health your habit. Until the next time, I will see you. Bye from the Lean Mind Body Coach. Remember, make health your habit.
Thanks for listening to the Make Health Your Habit podcast live show. Remember, the views and opinions expressed during the show represent those of our guest and host alone. We hope you enjoyed the show.